Thank you. Start the Common Council Finance Human Resource Committee meeting, Monday, July 11th. Common Council Member Julie Potter Shu.
Here.
Common Council Member Scott Harrington. Here. Common Council Member John Rapp.
Here.
Is there any need for corrections, additions, subtractions to the minutes provided in the last one? Anyone wants to provide topic A? City Administrator.
Use the Greenway funds for the new Inland Trestle Bridge assessment. You'll recall when the council approved the use of Greenway reserve funds for the mill race trail that was recently paid through Newell Park Hotel Park, that we made sure to leave $10,000 in that fund based on a request from the Greenway Committee. They have some plans, as we heard about in the future, to hopefully find funding to extend the trail all the way to Fulton Park across Susquehanna River. There's an old trestle bridge that's in the New Island property that they'd like to do a structural evaluation of. They have a quote from a structural engineer for $3,000 to proceed with that. That'll give them an idea of what it might cost, what it might take and cost to rehabilitate the bridge so that the ocean and the pedestrians and bikes. And if that's not an option, what it might be to replace. So it's just the next step in that process. So we'd like to ask the council to approve removing $3,000 from the reserve for that purpose.
Yeah, that bridge is scary. I would support that.
How did he get to Fulton after this?
There would need to be a new bridge for us. They have ambitious goals.
Okay. So 3,000 first. Study. And that leaves a balance of.
$7,000.
Thoughts, concerns?
Where is this? So the trail stops at this bridge right now?
A few years ago, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I remember, we closed off the bridge as well as we could with barricades, and people tend to try to get around anyway, but we created a new trail that goes around and across the land. There's a new right-of-way fence along 98 because it gets kind of close there. We want to make sure people weren't walking on the highway. So that's in place. There's a way around it now. So it's obviously not 100% necessary that this bridge be in place, but it was highly used and it was there. Is there an ideal goal to have it in place? They would like to have, like I said, a paved path all the way for accessible. Now, the trail that goes around is a footpath. It's not, certainly not something that can be accessible by ATVs.
And it's kind of steep, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, there's
Down.
a drop off right there.
Thoughts, John?
It's not clear in my mind about it, but what's the recommendation?
I would recommend that this be done. I think it's a step in the process. There's a lot of momentum now with the groups, the Greenway Committee, and also FLF, who is, the chair has publicly stated that he intends to raise money for these future projects. I think finding out what it might take to take it further is the next logical step. So, $3,000 is a reasonable number.
Anyone saying no to it?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Okay. Move it up. Jane? Topic B?
Looking at the airport fuel farm replacement, we have received, we've got one bid, which came in extremely over our current budget, and I have a letter from McFarland and Johnson recommending that we reject bids. We would like to send that to council. And I don't know if you want to add any more information to the project itself, but just briefly what they said, the New York State DOT grant received for this project totaled $889,000 plus. The first bid that we got was 1.2, and then this one was what, 1.9, I think?
1.2 was for what I would call the Cadillac.
Okay.
1.9 after we redesigned the scope and got it down to a Yugo. is 1.9.
1.9.
So that just shows you how material prices have skyrocketed.
So McFarland Johnson at this point recommends that we reject the bid and the project to be evaluated for alternative procurement solutions, significant reduction in the project scope, or rebid with when additional funds become available. Now, they have not informed me if they think that we can reapply for more grant funds for the project, if we can withdraw from this particular grant and reapply for it. Have they given you any indication on that?
So McFarland and Johnson have been aggressively looking at other ways of getting the work done. Sourcewell was the company that they're approaching right now. And we're going to see if we can get the 12,000 gallon tanks through Sourcewell at a substantial lower cost.
So that's where we stand right now.
So you've had Cadillac, you've had Yugo, you going for a Prius next?
I don't know what's after Yugo. You ever look at Yugo years ago?
Bicycle.
For a pin
Yeah, bicycle. I think bicycle is next. Yugo had actual cardboard on the inside of the worst. Topic C.
Judy, do you want to take it, or do you want me to?
I'm sorry. Do we actually need this to go all the way up to council for the rejection of the bid on topic B?
Yes.
Oh, all right. So is anybody saying no to the rejecting the bid? Okay, so we're in agreement. Sorry about that. Topic C.
I guess I can take that. We did a RFP for the Armory Structure Report grant. We received 5 proposals. I'd say that we're still in the process of finalizing our decision, but we'll have it ready for council. They're all within the budget. It's a grant-funded project. There's a small city match. And it's going to be looking at the structure of the armory relative to what we could possibly do with it in the future, along with ADA compliance, because there are some grants that we could go for pretty soon for ADA compliance. And it's also going to take a look at potential uses.
How much is a small city match?
Yeah, so the grant is $45,600 and the match is $2,400.
Thoughts? You guys good with it?
I said, I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Topic D, housing conditions assessment, RFP results.
Okay, so I'll do that one too. So this is another one that we got a grant actually from the same CDBG program, Community Development Block Grant Program. It's New York State funded for the housing conditions assessment, which is basically going to be hiring a firm to go out and look at our houses in the city, non-student housing, where we can identify them as being non-student, to look at the exterior and see what the condition of the houses are, and then our housing commission and subcommittees will be able to use that information to start making decisions on what grants we really want to target. So we received 2 proposals on that. We also are in the process of deciding which one, and we plan to have that ready before council as well. That grant was a $50,000 grant with a $2,700 local match. Both proposals were within that budget.
When's the last time we did that?
To my knowledge, we've never done that. We have the information that Codes gets, but most of their information is on multifamily. We don't have a lot of details on the single family. I think this is the first we actually will have this citywide look.
So it's single family only.
No, we will also be looking at multifamily and trying to make sure that we're looking at the family rentals
So we're going to look at everything?
Trying to. Going to be looking at probably about 3,000 units or homes by the time we get done with this thing. And it's going to be a walking, not driving down the street, walking down the street with the survey, checking the boxes of what the house looks like. Katie, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wondered why student housing is being excluded.
We're trying to focus on areas that we can help with the city grants, and we can't apply for grants that benefit student housing. So
I still see some benefit. I don't know if it impacts like the cost or the feasibility, but I still see the benefit of doing an assessment of the student houses.
we have a lot of that information through codes on the multifamilies, so they would know the condition of the homes, the multifamily homes, whether they're student or not, and they'd be able to pretty much have an idea of the siding meets code, if the porches and railings, and if the roofs are in decent shape. That's the kinds of things that this will be looking at. So we have a lot of that data. We're going to be taking a lot of the data from codes first before they start working on the actual survey, because if codes has a lot of information about the multifamilies, they may not need to re-look at those. So we'll know more as we go along to see what exactly codes has. And if you want the student, we could include the student housing information from codes into the database that would be created in this effort.
Yeah.
Because we already have most of that.
I guess, yeah, I mean, just coming from a neighborhood that has a lot of student housing, I think that the conversation around what we can do, maybe it's not through grants, but what we can do to elevate those houses, I mean, not even just up to code, but, to a quality that enhances the neighborhood, or at least doesn't significantly detract from it. So I think, I don't know about the way that the data is going to be compiled, but I think being able to say, if we have this subset of housing, this type of housing that is in this type of shape, that is a catalyst for conversation. So I would appreciate and encourage students being added in student housing being added in some way. There's no sense in doing double work, but if they're walking around and, are able to, like I say, sort of put them in their own category, that would be great, I think.
Right.
Because that is a big part of hopefully what the Housing Commission is going to be looking at, so.
I think that we'll have different sources of data. We're trying to make sure that we can cover as many as we can by foot, and that takes a lot of time, and if you have a consultant, that's a lot of money. So, yeah, we're planning on gathering that data wherever we can. If we find that codes may not have information on a particular house, and even if they think it's student or family, we'll be taking a look while they're on the street.
So it'll be like a complete assessment of the city.
As much as possible, yes.
Judy, is it correct to say that we can't use CDBG grant money to assess student housing? And that this would just be, like we said, taking our existing data and merging it into that database?
Yeah, we are trying to cover the houses that they would fund. They have limits on what they would fund. They will, we can fund low income and moderate income households and for grants and things like that. Student housing is out, yeah. So, yeah, we're trying to meet the grant requirements and not raise red flags with them either. So,
Yeah, I guess I just don't understand, so like, and this is just, I'm sorry to be asking so many questions, but this
Okay.
seems really like a really valuable thing, so I want to understand it. So they're basically going to walk around and say, or it's a partnership with codes, right? So they're going to say, we have reason to believe that this is a student house versus a rental, a multifamily.
that's what I know the $50,000 sounds like a lot of money, but when you're talking over 4,000 homes,
Again, sure, real quickly.
yeah, we're trying to get the most out of the money that we have. And we know that codes has a lot of information about the homes, especially inside, which we're not doing on ours, we're doing the exterior. by doing the exterior, sometimes it does give you a feel for what might be happening inside. But that's a whole nother level to get in there and look.
Right.
So, yeah, we're trying to do as many as we can, and as part of this, the first step will be pulling from codes what information they have about our housing stock first.
Gotcha. Okay, so they're not going to be walking around with a clipboard going like, I don't know, I think maybe students live here, and then.
No,
We're not.
it would be codes has a pretty good feel for the bigger student landlord names.
Sure, yeah, of course.
And they do have a feel for what homes, even the student landlords own, that might not be student housing. So they have a pretty good feel for that.
Okay.
But we knew we didn't have enough money to be able to do every single home. So that's where we were going with this, trying to get the single families, the owner occupied, multifamilies, the family occupied multi-units, and then get as much information as we can from codes about the multifamilies, including student.
Okay, yeah, and those types that you have listed can all be assisted by CDBG grants.
Everything but student.
Right, okay. I'm
A
understanding.
conversion of a house, like we can do rehab grants for multifamily.
Okay.
And if a student, a house that's a student house is going to be converted to year-round people or families or whatever, we can use our money on that, but then the property owner has to commit to the renting to more than 51%. 51% of the units or more have to be rented to low to moderate income people.
Okay.
So that's why it's important for us to understand what's happening with the student housing as well, in a different way, though, in case there are those conversions, then we'd have that data.
Yeah, which is like ideal. I mean, that's sort of the direction that we want to see our neighborhood go, so
Yeah.
that's great. That's really great to hear. Thanks for taking the time to explain that to me.
Any other questions? I just have one, Ginny, maybe you'll be able to answer it. For both topics C and D, the matching funds, where are we?
We've already matched those funds because you adopted the budgets last year, so the funds are already there.
Topic E?
That's me. We have a bus driver, Kathleen Winans, who has been with the city on and off as a part-time bus driver since 2000. She recently accepted a full-time appointment to a bus driver last month. And in recognition of all of those years of service, just so she can have a little bit of time available to her for appointments and vacation and other things, we would be looking to advance her 1 week of her 2-week vacation accrual, so 40 hours that she would have available to her effective next week, so that she could again, have a little bit of time. It's not typically something that we would be doing, but again, in consideration of all those years of service to the city, this is something that the department head supports, obviously the employee supports, and the CSEA supports as well. So right now, there is a negotiated provision in the CSEA agreement that allows us to advance that time at the 6-month mark. So we're really looking for the council to consider advancing it just a little bit earlier than that, so around the 2-month mark.
Any questions?
No.
No.
Move that up to full council. Topic F.
This is the quarterly staffing update that just shows I believe a copy is provided in your packet. It just shows citywide vacancies and staffing levels. So I don't know if everybody would like, if there's questions or would like me to review it, I guess.
Sure.
Okay. So this was updated in July. I guess the first page is Finance Department, so we were very happy here. The council just approved authorization for a finance coordinator, which is a fully budgeted position. Stephanie Decker, she started today. She's wonderful. We're very glad to have her. She comes to us from many years in the private sector and has a great skill set. And that makes them fully staffed. City Clerk's office is fully staffed as budgeted. Same for the personnel office. Same for the community development office.
Can we stop in the personnel office?
Sure.
How about look out in the new location?
We are still settling in, I mean, but the buildings and grounds crew, everybody has done such a tremendous job to get us settled in. It's really been amazing. So it's kind of working the way that we hoped. We're seeing faces that we haven't seen in some time, so we're very glad for everybody's help and support in getting there.
So the city employees are responding favorably?
Yeah, I find that, here parking was an issue for people also, especially people driving larger vehicles. I mean, some retirees would have trouble with mobility coming up to the second story of a building and walking around. So a lot of the things we were hoping to accomplish, we accomplished. We are waiting on just a couple final finishing touches from Gene and his people, and we're hoping to have a little open house where we'll invite council members, staff, anybody else who wants to come, take a walk through the space, see it. I've also mentioned to the mayor, and I'd like to say publicly, that is the Brenner building, and perhaps a rededication might be appropriate, given, that the city is not, the passing of former Mayor Brenner, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Community development, fully staffed. Code enforcement, fully staffed. You'll also note there that we have a new employee also who just started today, Gwen Germont. That was a recent council approval. Also doing a great job, really great addition. Seems like she fits in really great with the group, so we're very happy to have her there. I will say there is a student worker part-time that's vacant, and I believe that it's Stephen's intention to fill that when college resumes in the fall. They typically have a college student come in and help with office work and such. Central Garage is also fully staffed as budgeted. Oneonta Public Transit, this is always a fun one because you always hear us talk about all of our bus driver vacancies, and this kind of lays it out. So right now we have 2 full-time driving spots that are budgeted but vacant, and we have 8 part-time vacant bus driver spots. So of course the transit director and I, we know that that's what an ideal situation. We're obviously not prepared to probably recruit and fill all of them due to the national bus driver shortage. The council did, if you recall, earlier this year adopted a referral bonus for employees who refer somebody who's eventually hired, as well as a sign-on bonus. And we're having a little traction with those initiatives, so it is helping in that spot. So that was good to see.
Okay. So it's like $1,000 a month?
Yeah. Airport. That's a very large box for one employee, Mike Stevens, who does an amazing job up at the airport. The city's very lucky to have him, as I'm sure.
An amazing job. I was just smiling because I thought it was kind of funny. The boxes get bigger.
The boxes get bigger. Well,
Now the boxes just...
yeah, well, the fewer the people, the larger the boxes.
Okay.
Police department. So right now we're doing semi-okay in the police department. We have 1 part-time civilian dispatcher spot that's open, which is great because before we had a full-time spot and a part-time spot vacant. We filled both of those. Both are going well, from what I understand. Right now, you'll note I have some asterisks under police officers because I wanted to explain a little bit that the numbers, there's a little bit more to the story than the numbers represent. So there's 1 police officer recruit who's attending the entry-level law enforcement academy out in Boone County. He's doing a great job by all accounts. He'll be released, I believe, sometime in September, October to field training. So that's great. An additional officer has also recently returned from long-term medical leave and is assigned to desk duty only. So that's a budgeted spot, but the person is not out on the road doing any patrol. And I did not update it, but because this was as of July 1st, but effective July 18th, one of those additional 2 vacancies will also be filled because the council at the meeting last week approved the hire of Brian Page, who will be attending the Zone 5 Law Enforcement Academy at the end of July. So that means we have 1 vacancy, which really puts us in a fairly decent spot relative to where we've been historically. Of course, the new recruits don't have a direct impact on the operations of the department immediately because of the specialized training that goes into being a police officer. Fire department, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later. There's a very long footnote there. I wanted to kind of explain the staffing a little bit, the numbers. So you'll see that there are 4 fully budgeted captains. All 4 of those positions are filled. However, 1 captain is assigned to a light duty spot. There are 19 filled firefighter spots, and I noted that there are 5 vacant or anticipated vacant spots, and that's based on the budget. So right now, the fire department is based on 4 platoons, 1 captain for each platoon with 5 firefighters. So the 5 vacancies that I'm reporting are based solely on the budget through a combination of permanently funded and temporarily funded positions. So if you look at your budget, there's 3 lines for firefighter. One is 20 permanently funded positions. There is 1 additional full-time firefighter position that's been funded since, I believe, 2020. 2020. And then the council adopted in the budget last year 3 temporarily funded spots to kind of get the chief through based on attrition. So whether or not it ends up really being 5 vacancies is really a council discussion item and decision, but based on what is adopted into the budget right now, there are technically 5 vacancies, again, a combination of temporarily and permanently funded positions. Does that make sense? Okay. Then we get into public works. So the next page just shows the components because just shows everybody who's comprised of public works.
So all 7 of these supervisors report to Chris?
Yes.
Or does John take some alone and Chris?
It's not really broken down in that way. They share the responsibilities of supervising. It kind of breaks it down a little bit better if you go to the next few pages.
Yeah, I was trying to follow earlier on the computer screen, but.
Sorry.
So at the end of the year, when we do the annual employee report, Chris signs off on that, or is John signing off on it?
The supervisors, which not Chris or John, they're the ones that are doing evaluations in conjunction with John and Chris. So it's depends on the area.
So the first is engineering. You'll note that I have listed a part-time engineering technician that is vacant, but that is on the same level as an engineering aide seasonal, which is currently filled. That position is really working, doing construction observation on the West Street project. So typically what we like to do, Greg always liked to do, was have a student worker who's a civil or similar engineer program come in and help out with other engineering-related tasks over the summer. We're not able to really successfully recruit anybody for that spot this year, but we do have somebody great who is working in that construction observation position. So otherwise, in engineering administration, we're doing pretty well. Public Works, Buildings and Grounds crew. We are, believe it or not, full there. There's a seasonal labor vacancy that's currently filled by a student worker, as well as a bus driver who drives primarily on college routes, but didn't have all that much going on over the summer and offered to help out, so we're very grateful to have his help in the Buildings and Grounds crew. So that was a little bit of a creative employee sharing there to kind of get a person in to get that work done. Streets crew, we are, there is 1 seasonal vacant labor, which we are in the process of filling. And, wait a minute, no, I take that back. That position is typically filled over the summer, but due to needs in the department over the winter, it was filled in the winter as opposed to the summer. So even though the position is vacant, the funding has been exhausted for this year for that position.
Gotcha.
So this person helped with snow removal and shoveling, all that kind of stuff. We are still attempting to recruit a full-time heavy equipment operator or motor equipment operator. It's kind of like trying to snare a unicorn these days, but we're doing our best to try to find somebody. Next is the Parks crew.
I had a question about this, because the person at the top of the ladder here is assistant to the general supervisor. Which general supervisor?
So, yeah, it's a quirky civil service thing, Katie. So like the person who runs DPW streets crew His official civil service title is general supervisor.
Okay.
The person who runs the parks crew, his title is assistant to the general supervisor.
Okay.
And that's based on inherited titles from a structure that really no longer exists. Greg and I would be looking to kind of modernize those a little bit through attrition when people eventually vacate.
Okay, yeah, it's pretty confusing. So where does the assistant to the general supervisor, so parks and streets are kind of maybe in an antiquated way, sort of melded into one because they all report to the general supervisor.
For the course of history, Parks and Streets have oscillated from being together as one crew to being two separate crews, depending on the year, the budget. Not that it changes every year, but most recently, we've changed it, so we really have a dedicated Parks crew that sometimes helps out the streets and vice versa.
Okay.
So, for the most part, the assistants to the general supervisor is overseeing the parks operations, the general supervisor is overseeing the streets operations.
Okay,
Well, technically, that title, assistant to the general supervisor, still reports to the general supervisor.
okay, I think I understand. Thank you very much.
And of course, we'll be looking, like I said, to update those titles through attrition when appropriate.
Yeah, perfect.
But all that said, Parks crew is full, so we're very happy about that because they are working their butts off and doing a great job. The fields look good, the parks look good. We're very lucky to have this very dedicated Parks crew. I should mention there that we do have one employee who is out since the date of publication on a medical leave, but is expected to be back later this week. So they've been running a little short, but doing a great job. Public Works, Water and Sewer crew, full as budgeted. Water treatment plants, you will note that we have one vacancy in the senior water treatment plant operator title. We are looking to recruit that position as a water treatment plant operator trainee. So we are nearing the end of that recruitment and will hopefully be having a recommendation for hire to be made to council imminently, within the next couple weeks. But otherwise, the water treatment plant is also full. Also, another group who has been really doing a tremendous job. They've been running short since the beginning of May. This is a very difficult position to recruit for because it's a, again, highly technical position. So, otherwise, staff is budgeted. Wastewater treatment plant, which is our last of our public works components, and they are also full with the exception of one seasonal part-time labor, which I believe, and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but the chief operator kind of said that they were recognizing there's some budgetary limitations they were going to do their best to do without. So it is budgeted, but he is not looking to fill the spot.
In that particular box, there would be two of them?
No, there's one budgeted.
Okay, so should it have been a white box?
Oh, sorry, yes, I apologize. That is technically vacant, so it should have been a white box. That concludes the report.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? And if I'm not allowed to, just yell at me. How's the 10-hour shifts going?
The 10-hour shifts, are going phenomenally well from everything that we've heard. We had a meeting last week just to check in with our supervisors and ask people how they're doing. The supervisors seem happy, the employees seem happy. It seems as though we are really keeping on par with all the work that needs to be accomplished. Any work that comes up on those off-scheduled days is being dealt with efficiently and appropriately. And I also checked in with our CSEA leadership last week, and they're not hearing any complaints either. So thus far, it's accomplished what we had intended and hoped, which is, to kind of have a cost-neutral and budget-effective way of, kind of increasing morale while maintaining important services to the community. So thus far, I want to say tentatively, Scott, and I think that's a great question. I think it's going very well, about as well as we could have hoped.
Thanks.
If there's anything you're hearing, the contrary, please let me know.
I always wanted to ask the question, but I'm always like, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask that in public or not. So
Yeah, it's already negotiated. I mean, we have an existing agreement with the CSEA, so there's no Taylor law violation there. But no, I think it's a fair question, and thus far, as I said, it's going very well.
I also have a question, and maybe not for like a big discussion, but one question sort of popped up while we were going through this. is that all these positions are what we have currently budgeted, which is great and helpful. And I guess what I would want to know in follow-up to this, and maybe every time we do it, is like, is this breakdown, are these number of positions and how they're allocated effective? Like, are department heads feeling fully staffed with regard to, I feel like we're gonna talk about this a little more in a moment, but like, you know, because they're budgeted and they're filled, and that's good, but then also like, how are they functioning, from a department head perspective, I would like to know.
Sure.
Okay.
So maybe I could add in on that one.
Yeah, and if you could.
At some
refer it to
point,
me more clear.
for the budget, Greg's gonna come out and talk to us
Of
about what
course.
services we wanna provide, and that's, you know, that's his wheelhouse. So I think at that point, we'll dive into the numbers, and that's why he's bringing up the fire department today, because he's finding that we need to have a discussion about the fire department staffing, because of the services that he sees that we need to be providing.
Gotcha. Okay.
Good segue. Speaking of that, the next topic is kind of, as Len just said, is part of leading into our budget process this year. We're going to do things a little bit differently. I'd like to have conversations like Brian's going to engage with tonight with each of our department heads, whether they're at finance meetings or full council meetings, special meetings, whoever we decide. But I want to have some pretty in-depth conversations about what the types of services are that we provide. I mean, everyone knows generally speaking, but I want to talk about that and have you guys hear directly from department heads what it is that they're struggling with or doing really well at. Exactly to your point, you know, where do they need help? Is it more funding in this area or people? Obviously, we can't afford everything. The council's job in the budget process is to prioritize, and there's no better way to prioritize than actually understanding the options.
Yes.
So I think we have those discussions, which will take a couple months probably before we're really through them, that started the process, and then we can talk about, well, like, you know, JD and I will talk a little bit next council meeting about getting into our regular budget process. What does the council want to do as far as tax levy increase and this and that? That'll give us an idea of what revenue is going to be available to us, and then we can go back to the department heads and talk about, okay, here are our priorities as mutually agreed upon between you and the council in our discussions. Here's the money that we know we have, or maybe there's other revenues that we're looking at developing. How do we best accomplish our goals within the budget that we have? And then that will develop our first, you know, iteration of the budget that we present to you.
Cool.
That was my general thinking for this year.
Cool, thank you.
Sure. So I guess with that, Ryan, you want to jump into talking about the fire department staff?
Sure. So if you ask what I mean staffing. We talked about, I think, kind of towards the beginning of the year through the budget process that we wanted to go to 7-person crews. If you want to get the document out that I handed out to you guys, I'm sorry about it being late. As Katie had said, we traditionally staff with 26 members, even though the budget says something a little bit different. We typically staff with the captain and 5 firefighters, and that's 4 crews of 6. Okay? So I just throughout this document, I talk about that we operate a non-mandatory callback, which means when the crew that's on duty, you've got an opposite crew, so A shift is on duty, C crew is the opposite. So now if we get 2 ambulance calls, or there's a reported fire, or there's a bad car accident, C crew is the first crew to be called back in for overtime. So that's what I mean when we talk about a non-mandatory callback system. I get into a little bit about the demographics of Oneonta and how we're kind of on an island here versus other cities of our size. They traditionally have, and not all of them, but they traditionally have other career fire departments that they can support one another. Well, we don't have that. The nearest career fire department is Norwich, which is, if we would call them, it'd be like 50 minutes for them to come here. So we have to rely on volunteers who are going through the same issue where they're hurting for help, and it takes them a little bit of time to get out the door. They're still excellent professionals, and we have to rely on them, but when it comes down to it, it's going to be like 20 minutes before we're going to be getting help from one of those. So we need to hold it on until we can get that additional staffing here. Also, there's this stigma out there that firefighters just sit around and all we do is wait for fires to happen and we're just watching TV or whatever, doing training. The reality is you dive deeper into this document, there is a lot of things that we're responsible for. Every single time there's a gas leak, NICEAG calls us, say, send the fire department. We're their first responder. So that's several hundred calls because the city of Leona is serviced by natural gas that we get a year. Outdoor fires, car fires, we extricate people out of vehicles. And then there's the whole other side to the EMS. So I talked a little bit about that. But I want to focus on our responses to structure fires. If we are fully staffed in the station, that means we're responding to a reported structure fire with 6 individuals. That includes a pump operator, the officer in charge, and 2 firefighters on the first engine for a total of 4. Secondly, we're going to have another piece of apparatus. If it's in the city, it's going to be our tower ladder because we have hydrants here, and that's going to be 2 firefighters showing up on that. If it's in the town, we're going to be showing up with another engine because typically there's not fire hydrants there, so we need the additional water until we can get those mutual aid departments in. So I want you to think about how I'm going to explain this. We need to pick and choose what we do when we arrive on the scene. We're not big enough because of our staffing, our inadequate staffing, to be able to put the fire out, rescue people, and have a safety team that's set up for us, for the individuals that are operating inside. There's a NFPA standard, and the NFPA is an organization, an international organization that was set up. It basically protects firefighters against themselves. So, perfect example, our air packs that we wear has what's called a pass alarm on it. So if we were to go down and go unconscious, that pass alarm would activate. Back when air packs first came out, we never had one of those. So firefighters were dying. The way they fixed it, they came out with an FBA standard. Now you need to have one that clips on your belt. Unfortunately, that one needed to be turned on. So firefighters were still dying because we were lazy and we weren't turning them on. So they wrote another standard. Now they need to be integrated into the packs. So as soon as you turn the air on to the pack, that automatically turns on that pass alarm. So to circle back, the NFPA standard talks about our initial rapid intervention team. That's a safety team that is outside the building that is required, 2 individuals for the people that are inside operating. So every single fire that we go to, structure fire, we're operating with accidental success. Meaning when we we deploy all of our individuals inside the burning building, without that rescue team, we're putting ourselves in grave danger and we're going against a standard. So I really wanted to focus on that. And when we talk about service, that's something that needs to be considered because at this level that we're operating at, we can't do it all. And it's frustrating for now me as an incident commander. I know there's a huge liability to send those individuals in, but what's the risk versus reward? If there's somebody trapped inside that building and we don't do it, it's our job to go get them, right? So that's what's concerning for me. Any questions on that so far?
You may be getting into this, but I know obviously you guys have the EMS side. So when you send a crew out, how do you decide, like say there's an EMS call while you're out doing something, how do you decide?
Meaning like
how do you
fire or?
Safety, yeah, because if you're not having enough people at the incident, at the fire, whatever, in that moment, like how do you staff EMS at the same time? Just for my understanding, I know you make it happen, I just am curious.
Yeah, so right now with the 6, 3 go out in the ambulance, that won't generate overtime, so we won't call anyone back in. If there's another ambulance call, then that opposite crew would be paged. If that second call was, say, a structure fire, then we're showing up with 3, and we have to do all those jobs with 3.
Okay,
And it may be no water going on the fire, and going in, if we know, especially if there's a victim trapped, we're going in after that victim.
yeah,
But again, there's no safety blanket for those guys going in, especially no hose line. If there's no reported victims trapped, then we're gonna try and spray some water on it and get it knocked down as quickly as possible and just hold it at bay until we can get more resources there. But again, those resources are coming from a long ways away.
okay, thank you.
Yep. So continuing on, there's been topics or discussion in the past of 3 personnel versus 2 on the ambulance. If you turn to the second page, I listed out pros versus cons of the 2 versus 3. And while having 2 on the ambulance has the potential to reduce callbacks and possibly lower some burnout, the problem is when we look at the cons, it's unsafe for staff. And what our customer expects out of us is a high-quality EMS delivery system. And if we arrive on scene, again, and this is because we're that anomaly, right? If we were a bigger city, we would have an engine company staffed with 3 or 4 individuals coming to support those 2 individuals on the ambulance. We don't have that here. So the surrounding private ambulances, like the new county ambulance that's out, or an AMR that you see around, when they're dispatched to someplace in the county, they're also dispatched with that department's ambulance or that department's fire department. So there's always like lifting assistance and assistance getting the patient in and out and carrying the equipment, or assistance with treatment of the patient. Again, we don't have that luxury here, so in order to provide a safe environment for our staff and deliver EMS care for the patient that our customer, deliver EMS to our customers that they expect in an efficient way, we just need to stay at the 3. That would be my recommendation, and if you were to tell me to go in a different direction, I would not support it.
All right, I got a quick question since we're talking about EMS.
Sure.
Just throwing it out there, it's probably a bad idea, but has there ever been looked at taking the ambulance and making it south, like the fire department ambulance is an ambulance service, so that they're not a fire-based ambulance?
So I understand what you're saying, but it goes back to my comment about how we're already understaffed on the fire side. So if we're not cross-training, then when we go to that structure fire, you see what I'm saying? Like, if we had 60...
I mean, I've asked the question the right way. What I was talking about was you staff your fire department full staff, but the ambulance isn't part of that staffing.
So
like your firefighters are just firefighters, and then the ambulance is just on its own in an ambulance.
So privatize the EMS side of it?
Not necessarily privatize it, but I mean, but it could be a municipal ambulance, just not.
Can
You know
I
what I'm
ask
saying?
how that would impact the fire department's funding? Or is it separate?
I believe what Scott's question is separation of crews. He's looking at a fire crew versus an EMS crew. And I think that what the chief's point is that if he doesn't have the adequate staffing for the fire crew itself, even though it would be 6 firefighters, he wouldn't have the backup team at a fire call. Am I understanding that correctly, Chief?
Yeah.
So I have not done a cost estimate of having a fire crew versus with a combined EMS crew. So I cannot quote those numbers to you because I have not studied that.
Yeah, sure. But, I mean, is it fair to say, as a general question, that the revenue generated from the ambulance calls is
Supports the fire
supports
department.
the fire department, yes.
Well, the way I like to put it is that every department within the city supports the city. We have several different revenue sources that fund the general fund. For example, the tax levy raises $4.8 million. That doesn't just come from the finance office, that comes from every department within the city providing the services. The fire department itself, the services that it provides to the community also generates revenues, but it also has the offsetting expenses. And I've explained to the fire chiefs before that if it was a freestanding fire department, the cost would be much higher than just what is in their A3410 budget, because they would have to pay for their building, all of their insurances, all of the cost of running the building, and so on. None of those costs are there. Also, they would have to pay for all of their retirees, which they do not. So yes, they do provide revenues from the fire contract and the ambulance, but so does every other department throughout the city, providing, because of the services that we provide as a government. We're collecting sales tax revenues, we're collecting mortgage tax revenues, we're collecting the tax levy itself. So I don't like to put in silos the amount of revenues that each department generates itself. Now, do we do that on our government-wide financial statements? We do allocate it back up to the different types of services. We try to align the expenses with the revenues to show you. But we also do not allocate the tax levy to all of the different departments. I know this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but I try to make people understand that the city is a team, and as a team, we raise revenue to provide the services.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is if we had a municipal EMS, it would all go into the same, municipal funding in order to provide the services for each department.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up?
No, because it won't be enough to trash with us. I'll talk to you one-on-one because I'm not getting it out there the right way, so.
Okay, so moving on, talk about the training requirements. Initial training for firefighter, recruit firefighter training requires 680 hours of initial training, followed by 141 hours of yearly training after they get their initial training. So every firefighter per year needs 141 hours of training, and that's the bare minimum. That's without doing anything specialty. Like I discussed with you guys before, we sent a whole bunch of individuals out to get water rescue trained. That's a specialty training that they wouldn't get at this academy, but that's now a level of service that we provide to our community.
Does that count toward 141 hours, especially?
Little parts of it can, but no, not all of it. It's an addition. I'd like to go through a couple of the different programs that we're involved in. We do multi-agency drills, so with other departments. We're always doing station tours. We have one in there today. We provide CPR and EMS training for the community. We sometimes assist with fire inspections on like the college housing and stuff like that. Excuse me. We generally assist code department whenever we see something. We refer stuff to them. We have an EMS fight team. We put smoke detectors in homes. We've done that in the past where we've partnered with we provide special response team medics to the police department. So in the past, when they've gone on raids, for whatever reason, we're there for EMS support for them. This year we did the citywide training for all the PESH. We do all the fire extinguishers for the city, and really, probably the most important thing that we do is we do the fire prevention in the schools. We start right in kindergarten, go right straight through. This year, we also do live fire demonstrations for the seniors, so they have an understanding of how a smoke detector really saves your life, because they're going to be going off to college, and how a sprinkler system can help you. We do that in college as well. Any organization that calls us requesting some sort of demo like that, we're able to do that. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but we just partnered with the YMCA down in the 6th Ward and had the junior firefighter camp, where we had that same live fire demonstration. I think it was like 4 through 7-year-olds was the age range. But we had a LifeNet helicopter that does the medevacing. That was there. We did fire prevention stuff. It was just a fun day that we had with kids, and we had all of our fire trucks down there. We had a little parade. So that's a great event that we're part of. Well, the EMS training. Based on your level, and I don't want to get into all the levels and the different, I'll get into the levels, but not all the different trainings, because this can take forever. But basically, there's EMT level, AEMT level, there's AEMT critical care, and there's paramedic. What you need to know right now is every single new hiree is required to be a paramedic. A paramedic is basically an outreach of a physician, an ER physician in the ER. So we bring an emergency department to your house, and if your heart stops beating, you're not breathing, we have all the tools necessary to hopefully correct that. Other, I don't want to say lesser calls, but things like somebody having a heart attack. We've got the cardiac monitor that diagnoses something like that and can send the patient directly to a facility that's going to treat them immediately for it. So I would say our customer care is top-notch and one of the best in the area based on our technology and our quality providers that we have in the fire department. And I would continue to support the paramedic, the recommendation to have paramedics part of the job duty. At the bottom here, you see the medics bring the emergency department certification, the following page after the conclusion. That's just a list of all the different calls that we handle. Again, most people don't have any clue of what we're dealing with out in the field. The following page, we're really going to start talking about staffing. The last time there was any increase to the staffing in the Oneonta Fire Department was in 1984. The decision was made to go from 5 to 6 at that point. In 83, the call volume was 1,573 calls. And then I'm going to give you a breakdown of what the calls have been since 2004 through 2021. If you notice, that trend is continuously going upward, minus 2020, where there was an industry standard lowering of call volume due to COVID. Because basically people were scared to go to the hospital. I want you to recognize that as of the 7th of this month, we've gone to 1,843 calls. So year to date, that's about 9.8 calls per day. And if we're going to compare that to 1983 and that 1573, that was 4.3 calls per day. So we're doing more than double the work. And we're on pace this year to break an all-time record. And what I'll also add to that, that's not in here, is we've basically for all intents and purposes, stopped doing mutual aid EMS. The county ambulance is up and running, so there's 250 calls a year that we're not handling because another agency is. If we were doing that, we would be 3,700 in that area. So we need to kind of balance the health and safety of our individuals and providing a level of service to our customer, even though we want to be good neighbors. That's the direction we have to go. I also want to emphasize during the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, there were, which we still have, but there was a call and part-time department or roster that was quite robust. We had 8 to 20 individuals that were part of that program throughout those years. We don't have that anymore. So if anything, we're doing all this extra work without that additional staffing. We're at the bare minimum. We're doing it with less than we had in 1983, yet the call volume has more than doubled. So I certainly want to stress that. Really, firefighter health here is a huge concern. This call volume has got the staff running ragged, especially the overtime that's taking place, because right now we have, each crew has one individual that's out for whatever reason, or is down one individual because of injury, long-term illness, retirement, individuals at the academy. So we're kind of on par with a national trend where we're seeing sleep deprivation, issues with sleep apnea, heart problems. We're more susceptible to injuries or illnesses, which I'll talk about on the next page more in depth. It's taking a toll on our mental health. And I also want to stress that while we don't have an active case of cancer, all of those things increase your risk profile for cancer. And we actually have, I don't want to say this, but an almost 100% cancer rate in our retirees after a certain age. So we need to do better.
Ron, you said each crew is down one, so that means your regular staff crew is 6, right?
Correct.
So you're down to 5 on every crew.
For
Sort of. For what you're
yes,
saying.
correct. Because we got an individual at the academy, that will change, but yeah, one is the retirement, the unplanned retirement. One is the long-term sick or late duty. Then the 2 of the academy.
So you get your 6, gives you the 5, so your 7 that we're trying to get to is only getting, we're only down to the,
We'll give you 6 at this point, if we have.
I just wanted to follow, I'm sorry.
Brian, you touched on it in the beginning. Why don't you take a minute and just kind of really explain how your department staffs these calls with the same staffing number that we've had since, it's actually April. So that the folks that haven't lived it understand how it really goes down. I think you've touched it a little bit, but I don't think you've addressed it well enough that they understand that there's really no off-duty time, that you're constantly being paged back in to fill in.
Yeah, so if you want, I was going to get to it the last page, but the last page is a response matrix that basically shows how we respond based on certain calls. So if we did one EMS call, whether it's an ALS call, meaning advanced life support, or BLS, basic life support, we send the 3 personnel. That does not generate any callback. However, as soon as a second call is going on simultaneously, that opposite crew is being called. A majority of the time for everything else, as far as the rescues and the fire, the way we're staffed, that is going to generate overtime. So car accidents, reports of fires, things like that. we're gonna be calling back in a crew because our staffing is so short that that's how we need to operate. Those 6 individuals only give us so much. So the reality is, when we call individuals back, going back to the beginning, it's a non-mandatory callback. So you might get one person off of that crew, you have the opportunity to get all 6. A majority of the time when you're burnt out, and especially during the summer season when it's New York, we only get 3 good months to maybe get your boat out, to go on a fishing trip, things like that. You're going to be less likely to come back in. So then that transitions to, now we call in an additional crew. And then those individuals are going to be either coming on work the next 24 hours or just got off work the 24 hours previously. So some of them may not want to come in, so then you have to tone the next crew. And the reality is, where we stand right now, we're toning all 3 crews just about every single time for these emergency callbacks.
It's not just good weather, it's also childcare and other life.
Yes.
That's happen.
But there's individuals, because of this contractual overtime or these vacancies, where they're working every other day. We had one individual that worked in a 2-week period, 111 hours of overtime.
Of overtime.
Of just overtime.
In addition, on top
Shit,
of,
that's
in
on
addition
top
to
of
shit.
that.
Correct.
Wow.
That's dangerous. And then when I talk about that accidental success, now when you add poor judgment into it because our individuals are tired, that's lining everything up so that we're going to get someone injured or killed. And that's the reality of our business. So I mean, to be completely transparent, I came in here hoping that I was going to be able to fight to have 7-person crews. There was a time, or there was a window of opportunity because the fire academy still had, I would say, 5 or 6 positions available, and I was hoping to come in here and implore you to fill those positions. However, as of 2 o'clock today, we received a phone call saying that those positions have now been filled and that window is closed. So a little bit frustrating on my part. However, that's my part because I get to see my guys, my staff every single day and see the look on their faces because they're exhausted. So I was really hoping to have a solution for them immediately. But now we need to kind of focus on a long-term solution, and I hope you guys will be part of that.
So you're looking for, I think we did this last year, we sat down. You want 7 full-time guys for your shifts, right? So what I think there's gonna be another 20 people, but you're looking for 7 full-time staff.
He's asking for 4 additional staff.
Well,
Yeah, it'd be 7, right? Because we're at 6, so we're adding 1 each crew, we're 7, just get us.
So this, people don't get confused. He's asking to hire 4 additional personnel so that they get the level of the crews to the 7.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying.
I know, I understand what you're saying, but it might not be clear to.
But you're looking for 7.
I'm looking for 7-person crews. There's budgeted positions now that take us above that minimum of the 26 full-time firefighters, captains, and chiefs.
We have budgeted this year to have 1 7-person crew and 3 although obviously our crew staff. No.
No. The 2022 budget includes the 2 chiefs, 4 captains, and 4 7-man crews. We have those are the amount of personnel within the 2022 budget. 3 of those were to be funded temporarily and then not refilled upon retirements. However, the 2022 budget includes full-year funding for 7-man crews. Unfortunately, our plan was to get people hired to attend the February academy.
August 1st.
Well, originally when we were in budget time, we thought there was going to be a February academy. That did not work out. So now we're looking at the August academy, and you have 3 people that are going to go.
Potentially.
But where does that bring the numbers to currently?
Can we just take a pause? Did you just say we had already budgeted for 4 additional personnel, but we didn't capitalize on it? We're talking about it in July.
No.
No.
So I'm misunderstanding something.
So can I weigh in here, just because this really gets into the recruitment issue, and so we're dealing with a variety of factors. So as soon as council adopted that budget with those numbers, we ordered the test and put all the pieces in place to get those positions filled. For a variety of factors, literally this afternoon, I just got in my hands the written results of the exam that was administered in April. So what our hope had been was to give the test in April, or was it the end of March? March. So I'm sorry, it wasn't even April, it was March. To get those back, have the physical agilities administered, do as much as we possibly could, so that way when the academy time rolled around, we could have people to plug into that academy. That did not happen because of the delay in receiving the exam scores. We also, quite frankly, had an absolutely horrific pass rate on our physical agility test that the department had administered prior to getting the written results. We put that into place again proactively in the hopes that we could have this one more of those requirements done, ready to go. Captain Tubia in the fire department is our trainer. He does a fantastic job. He and I believe Firefighter Johnson administer that program. They do a great job. So out of all of the people who participated in that physical agility test, the first one last month, we had 2 people who passed. So we're dealing with a lot of really unique challenges in staffing. So I would argue that it's not that we didn't capitalize on it, Len, but just that we had a lot of factors that contributed to our inability to legally fill those positions.
So the list that we had in December of 21 was not valid? Or there wasn't any valid candidates on it?
There wasn't any open positions at the fire academy to send them. So we would have basically had untrained personnel sitting here, and I didn't want to run the risk of, because of overtime, having an untrained person filling the seat for a trained person.
And I think that's important to mention too, like the chief kind of, these people who are in the fire department are highly specialized, highly trained individuals. So if we hire them today, it'll take 3 years really for the person, once they attend the fire academy and then also achieve either their basic EMS level of certification and then to become a paramedic. I mean, so decisions that you're making now will not really be seen, the effects will not be seen in the budget for really 2-3 years down the road.
But for today's purposes, you've already had permission to hire 4.
The way I understand it, for this year, it was temporary. It was to cover the people retiring. So I guess what we need from you, if you agree, or what I'm asking is that long-term funding, so that we have that year after year.
So you don't want it temporary, you want it permanent.
Guaranteed.
I should also mention just one brief thing. I'm sorry, Katie, interrupted you. No? Okay, so we do have 3 conditional offers extended right now to 3 candidates, which is comprised of 2 candidates who were reachable on the list last year, and then the only candidate from this year who passed the physical agility in the first round. So every possible eligible person right now is being processed as a candidate. So we should hopefully be able to recommend to you soon the hire of all 3 of these candidates, and the chief has been able to register these 3 particular individuals for the entry-level fire academy in Montour Falls starting in August. So hopefully, part of this will be...
Is that the only place you can send them to be trained, is Montour Falls?
It's the place I recommend, because that's one of 2 places throughout the state where you can go to further your career, to go get that specialized training. I feel like if an individual goes out to the fire academy and has a recruit schooling there, that they're gonna be more apt to go back and get their specialized training because they're comfortable with the facility. But there can certainly be a plan B if needed. And we actually had approached that back in the spring. So we've got 2 individuals that are just about done with their academy, and they're going to be going back into the rotation as soon as they're done. We didn't think we were going to get them in, so we had talked with the city of Utica, and they were on the verge of allowing us into their fire academy until the New York State Fire Academy called us back and said, okay, we've got 2 positions now. So there's always a plan B.
But as of today, there's no opening in the school.
No, as of basically 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock, right. They said no,
Yep,
on your fault.
yep.
Okay.
Okay, so I appreciate the link that you're going to help me and other folks who may not be as familiar understand how staffing and funding impacts what you do. So I think that I understand from a safety perspective how 7-person crews will help make calls safer and help with the staffing levels in terms of, multiple calls at the same time and that kind of thing. How does having 7-person crews with the same number of groups, so for
Crews.
crews,
Or
thank you.
platoons.
How does that help with the exhaustion piece, or does it not?
So our minimum staffing is 6 personnel on each one of those crews. So think about all the contractual time off. Vacations, holidays, if you're at full staffing of 7 and someone calls in sick, you don't have to call in that opposite crew to cover that 24 hours for that shift.
Because you have someone on that crew who is scheduled off, or do they come in anyway?
Can you say, repeat that?
No, I think I answered my own question as I said it.
Okay.
Basically, like, you're not only calling in 6 and having a backup, you're calling in 7, but if someone calls out, you have the 6 people you need, so you're running at 6 on that day.
Correct.
That makes sense.
So one of those 7 off the opposite crew is coming in on overtime.
Gotcha.
So you've got contractual time off. Sorry, I want to make sure I explain this
That's
correctly.
okay, I'm listening.
7-person crews, if someone calls out sick, has the day off, that drops us to 6, we don't have to call anyone else in. So
Right.
that opposite crew isn't having to come in and cover.
Right.
So now where you're more apt to have 3 days off in between your shift than working every other day.
And so presumably this would also help with the overtime thing, yes? Or no? In terms of like
Depends.
the amount of overtime that everyone in the fire department is working all the time.
It will affect the overall, I mean, this year we're not doing well, and certainly I'll explain that here shortly, I guess. But we're gonna cover that contractual time of those individuals, and as far as the sleep deprivation and stuff like that, in a typical year, it should help. This year, not so much, because we have so many pieces on the table right now with 2 people at the academy, the retirement, and 1 individual out on light duty, and to be honest with you, we've had another injury, and most likely gonna have a long-term leave again. So.
Okay.
And if we want to look at the numbers now, we can look at, if you look at the first page, it talks about the overtime numbers.
Gotcha. Oh wow, so these are all overtime hours.
Yeah. So look at the bottom of the page, it says as of 7/3/22. So this is basically to date, what our overtime numbers are looking like.
Gotcha. And this is last year on the other page.
Correct, all of 2021.
Okay.
Some areas that I wanted to highlight, one being sick leave coverage. If you look at 2021 versus 2022 to date, we've used basically the same, a little bit more already in 2022. So what those numbers clearly say is people are exhausted, and if we're thinking about the health and well-being of our individuals, like, think about, when are you susceptible to getting sick? Have you been working like a dog or staying up long hours? And I think the proof is right there.
Yeah. So, being probably the greenest person sitting at this table, I see no reason why we shouldn't support 7-man crews going forward. What I want to understand is where that fits where that fits toward fixing sort of the general ailment of the department, which is exhaustion, which is, overtime, which is sort of all the things that we talk about all the time. So I think I get it from a safety standpoint. I understand what you're saying from an exhaustion standpoint. I think the question that I have, well, I guess the exhaustion and the overtime kind of go hand in hand, right? Like, if you're adding, it feels like, those little puzzles that you can do and you slide a tile here and there, it feels like that. And I feel like that's a really challenging job to have. So I appreciate that you do it. You're having all these requirements as well in terms of like training, additional training, things like that. I know that a lot of times overtime is used to cover like contractual leave and training, and the thing is like that I'm having trouble understanding is that additional firefighters are also going to come in with those contractual leave and training requirements as well. So where is sort of like the tipping point where you have enough staff that you can move all those tiles so that the load on any individual firefighter is lessened?
So that tipping point starts with getting 7. Obviously, as a fire chief, I would want all the staff you could possibly give,
Sure.
but I have to think.
Yeah, let's be real. Like,
have to be realistic.
but also realistic.
Exactly. So part of that was also, and we haven't talked about it, is potentially doing a contract with the local hospital to offset some of those costs
I remember you talking about
and
that.
get additional staffing.
Okay.
So that was going to be my approach. But the problem is we have to fix the major problem now before we can take on any additional work. Does that make sense? So getting us to 7 hopefully gives more rest for all those individuals because all of that contractual overtime is covered. We're always going to have emergencies. We're always going to have those double calls. We're going to have fires, those emergency callbacks. Hopefully, as you talked about those pieces, hopefully if individuals aren't so burnt out, instead of calling in that opposite crew and then those other 2 crews to cover these emergencies, hopefully those individuals will come in and we'll only have to call 1 crew. So now not everyone is collectively tired all the time. So if we can get all those things lined up, and you're right, it is challenging. I'm hoping some of the things will start to fix themselves, but we'll certainly monitor it, and if it's not, then we'll have to adjust.
Yeah, I guess I was hoping to understand, it feels like you're building something, right? And I want to understand where we go toward a sustainable fire department. But this is the next piece, is what you're saying, from my understanding.
Yes. I mean, again, I have to be realistic to have a sustainable fire department for you guys financially and for the community. That's a discussion that we would really have to sit down as a group collectively and look at all those numbers. But I wouldn't ever say no to more personnel if we head down that road.
So Ginny, realistically, thank you guys for entertaining, like, my coming out to speak on this. Because we budgeted, they're temporary, but they're budgeted for this year. If we include them in next year's budget, if we were not to increase the levy in order to, because they're already budgeted, but that's at the expense of something else, some other department. I appreciate that you're nodding. Understanding might not really question.
I understand your question. Yes, currently they're funded in this year's budget. The goal last year during the budget, because of the legacy costs of increasing the number of staff, will have a long-term effect on the community as a whole. The council at the time agreed that it was a temporary funding process.
Yes.
And I do have some estimates. If we were to hire 4 new firefighters in 2023, and they had a 20-year career, and I estimated health insurance legacy cost after their retirement for former firefighters, it's estimated to be about $14 million over that 35-year period.
I didn't hear you.
Pardon me? About $14 million per fighter, for the 4 firefighters. So what the council has to decide, and what Greg and I will be presenting to you, are the different options for you to consider. Because if you remember last year in the budget process, we had a number of departments asking for new personnel. And we were, at the time, for the 2022 budget, the only ones that we actually added were for the fire department themselves. So we just have to look at the different priorities and see the funding sources, that we have available. However, having that said, if we look at the overtime costs, which is the next topic that Greg and I need to discuss with you, the amount of money that we are spending on overtime at this point in time, I believe, exceeds the cost of bringing on 4 new firefighters. But what will change in the budget process is funding the 4 new firefighters on an ongoing basis, where what we have been doing now with funding the overtime is we give an estimate for what we would like to see versus what in reality has been happening. So if you look at the past 4 or 5 years average of the overtime budget, you will see that we have looked at different combinations of keeping the current staff, adding part-time, but because of long-term medical leaves or retirements or contractual leave time, a variety of different combinations, we've had a lot of hurdles that we've had to go over, and Katie just explained the hurdles for recruitment and the amount of time that it takes. So we have to look at where we're going to place the costs, and is it going to be on the overtime or is it going to be on increasing the staffing. And I think the chief just covered the overtime pros and cons, if you want to put it that way. And Greg, I don't know if you want me to go on with the numbers as far as what we currently have to do for the overtime projections for 2023, or if you wanted to touch
Before
on
you
it.
go on, I just got a quick question. Didn't we put in for the grant to fund firefighters, so will the 14 million still be inaccurate? Because doesn't the grant pick up like the first 3 or 5 years?
Yes, but I am not making assumptions that we're going to get that grant award. And if we do get that grant award, I'm sure the chief will, want to utilize that towards the Fox contract if possible. But say we don't get the Fox contract, but we also get the award, then that will be another option to consider. I don't want to speak for the chief, but as of right now, I'm making the assumption that we don't have that grant money. So, but currently, if you look at our current overtime situation, we budgeted 6,000 hours for 2022, and we separated it between regular overtime and training overtime. So 6,000 hours at $42 an average is $253,000. Currently, we still have a balance of about $72,000 for the training, but we're $125,000 over budget for the regular overtime. We budgeted 6,000 hours, they're now around $7,600, and that's only through July. The average overtime per cycle is averaging about $22,500 per cycle, and we've got 13 more cycles to go, so that's going to be an additional about $293,000 if the rest of the year follows that average. Add on to that 30% for retirement, 7.65 for our FICA expense, and Greg, I think that total came to what, 598,000, something like that?
So 600, yeah.
So we have to figure out, we do have some funding available in the .1 because we have not filled those positions that we budgeted for. We've got about $164,000 available for that. So the only recommendation I have at this point in time of the year to fund what our current overtime estimate is strictly fund balance. I do not have any revenue sources to cover it at this point in time. And I just want to make one thing clear. I know we're doing very well on our sales tax revenue, but there is a regulation that you are not allowed to increase your revenue budgets for any routine revenue sources until the entire fund has an excess. So if we were getting additional state aid or a grant or something that was very unexpected, we would then be able to raise our revenue budgets. So the council's going to have to decide how we are going to fund the overtime budget currently. And my recommendation is just going to be fund balance, because right now I do not have another source. I also do not have another expense area to show you significant savings to fund that amount of money. We do have contingency, but my recommendation for that is that we will need that for other areas within the city's departments. So Greg, is there anything else that I left out?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so for me to break this down into a little bit smaller modules, topic G, the chief is asking for 4 full-time positions. 3 were budgeted,
No, all 4 were budgeted.
says 3. I pop my budget open.
What the chief was not including in his presentation was the 25th firefighter, which we have funded since 2020. So you're going to see 20, 1, and 3. Do you see that in your budget?
I see a 1 additional firefighter,
Right, and then underneath it, you see 3?
and then I see temporary funded firefighters 3.
Yes. So that brings it to 4. That brings it to a 7-man crew.
So, is it the city administrator's recommendation that we move the temporary firefighters into permanent status?
You can't do that, please.
To move temporary, oh, you mean in the budget process? I think my recommendation would,
Budgeted, but just permanently moving towards having permanent firefighters. Given the fact that there's no call department or part-time department, that those resources have come and gone. And they're relying totally on full-time staff to handle calls that, since I've left, have gone up dramatically.
I wouldn't make that recommendation tonight, only because we're not fully in the budget process, combined with the fact that we're not under pressure to try to send additional recruits to the academy because it's full beyond those 3 positions. That's what we were talking about. Maybe we should do a mid-year commitment to 7 full-time firefighters in perpetuity. I think now that we have a little more time and we can look at this in the entirety of the budget process, we should take that time to continue studying, see where this Fox contract goes, look at what other options there might be. Perhaps it's a wise idea to have a subcommittee of one of, maybe this committee, to talk further about other options, if there are any. I know Ryan has thought through everything imaginable, and his recommendation is moving to 7 firefighters. I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying that right now, I wouldn't recommend tonight that we, next week, ask the council to commit to a budget for 2023 when we're not in the 2023 budget process. Does that make sense? It was long-winded, but basically I'm saying I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. For
What's standing in your way, though?
What's standing in our way? The entire 2023 budget process considers more than just the fire department, and the council is going to have some difficult decisions to make, as it did last year, as to what levels of service we can provide. And I just think that we should be looking at the entire picture to make those decisions.
I would like to remind you that in the '22 budget, outside of the fire truck itself, we had to cut $3.2 million in requests. And there was also 8 requests for additional personnel, and we only funded the 3 firefighters. So I just want you to keep that in mind, and I think that's what Greg's point is that we need to look at the entirety of the 2023 budget. And I think it is crucial that the entire council view this meeting to hear Brian's presentation, and not just this committee.
If we had the opportunity to hire 5 instead of 3 instead of the academy in August, then I would be much more likely to say, let's do that, because there's not another clear, better option right now. But we've got a little time because we don't have that opportunity, so why not take that time to look at everything? That's my perspective.
When's the next academy?
Spring,
So we're gonna lose a year.
right straight through August.
So I'm asking you, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I'm asking you, as our city administrator, that we already have an opportunity to hire this 3 positions.
Well,
We have an opportunity.
yes, but as Katie explained, the
I heard
recruitment,
what the chief said, I heard what Katie said, and now today, I feel like this committee is getting asked, do we want to look at this as a temporary and move it up as a permanent to full council so that Brian can make his presentation? And so that's why I turned to you and asked you, what's your recommendation? Because we've talked about this before, you started the conversation by saying, let's talk about what services we want to provide. Well, in my role, I want to see fire, EMS, police, DPW. Those are services as a city resident I like to enjoy. I enjoy seeing my street clean. I enjoy knowing the fact that I can call 911 if I'm on the floor because I got hurt again and the ambulance is going to show up. That's me. I'm one vote.
I think,
That's why I was looking to you for your recommendation as our city administrator that we're moving this down. We're not kicking the can anymore, because this is where I respectfully disagree with Jenny. I have for years and years, that we've under budgeted our overtime. We don't look at it analytically as we should, because we already know what the numbers are going to be, but we under budgeted because I understand that we're moving money into another part of the global budget. I got that. I've just disagreed with it. Because then we're coming back and then we're doing, what we're doing tonight is we're gonna move money out of unrestricted fund balance to pay for the overtime that should have been budgeted back 1 year ago. That's me. That's my thoughts on this. That's how I look at it. I don't know how the rest of this committee looks at it. But for me, I'm looking at this going, do we do it now? Bring it to full council. Chief, are you ready to do a full council presentation on what your needs are? Okay.
am I understanding correctly that at this point, at this rate, that overtime is exceeding the cost of the additional firefighters?
at the current pace it is now.
So,
And can I just clarify?
sure, please.
Ron, I understand your position, and as we explained it back in the budget season, that the average annual overtime hours was about 7,500 to to 8,000 per year. We budgeted 6,000 in the anticipation, and at the time, we were thinking the academy was going to be in February. I don't know how it got changed, it probably was something at the state level. So we budgeted overtime for the first 6 months at the regular occurrence. Then the last 6 months, thinking that the 3 new firefighters would be on staff by June, and they would be available to cover the summer vacations. That scenario did not work out. So the fact that we budgeted 6,000 hours instead of 8,000 was because we had budgeted for the hiring of 3 new personnel. So I just want to make it very clear that everybody understands that we were recognizing the history of overtime in the 2022 budget. We also recognize the need to bring on the additional staff. So, but at the time, the council said it was a temporary hire because of the legacy costs and not knowing if the 2023 budget could sustain supporting them again. So, but the overtime cost now, the projection for 2022 is 16,000 hours of overtime. That's not sustainable. So that's going to cost, just in wages, almost $600,000. Add 30% onto that for retirement and then the FICA costs. So that's why what we're currently realizing, hiring the additional firefighters would be more economical than continuing to pay this rate of overtime.
Yeah.
And I also want you to understand that the first year, there's a bigger savings because the new firefighters are starting out at the very first step of the grid. But as time goes on, in the years, and they start getting to the higher levels of the grid, the overtime expenditure is going to be higher. So it will eventually start to cost more, but in the interim, it will get us through there. But what is crucial about it, and I've mentioned this to the chief directly, is if we go 7-man crews, and if the SOP is raised from 6 to 7, we'll be right back in the same overtime situation. Because then we'll just be covering overtime for 7 people instead of 6. So we have to keep that in mind, and the chief and I have talked about that in detail.
So, Craig, at the beginning it was to start thinking about priorities, correct? I'm in the grades, police, fire, EMS, DPW. That's what I think a municipality is supposed to offer as the primary, if that's what you're looking for at the beginning of all this. And I do think that, when I pick up the phone down 911, God help if it's a 2-man crew that's gotta come pick me up off the floor. I'm not a light person. So I think we really need to look at the staffing. I think we need to try to look at it as a permanent basis. I've been on record down in the 6th ward that I will support a budget increase for staffing of the fire department and our police department. So if that's what you kind of need to know for, intents and purposes, that's kind of where I stand. Is, if that helps you out as you're going the 2023 budget.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, that was the intent to, this is the first step in one department we're talking about initially tonight. My only point is that we're not in the 2023 budget process, so why make a 2023 budget decision outside of everything else? Even if you can project that, that's what you're going to support, and maybe the whole council would agree. The reason we might have said, let's make a decision about a 2022 budget item would be if we had these positions to have the academy.
In a bigger scope of things, when thinking long-term range, maybe one of the discussions that maybe we should sit down and have is between the city, the town, and maybe the fire district of West Oleana, and see if we can get a greater Oleana Fire Protection District going, where everybody's paying into it, so you got more money, more coverage, more. That's a long-term plan, but I think it's one that's worth at least having an open discussion about. It may not happen, but
I think you raise a good point, Scott, which is that, you know, our fire department does provide an excellent service to our community, but not just our community. You know, like regionally, you guys do a lot. And there is help, like you were saying, but, you know, I think you do so much for not just our community that I think that Scott has a point in terms of like other people sort of investing in that as well. And I didn't say that the way that I wanted to, but it's out, so.
I'm just trying to think outside the box. None of my ideas may be good. It's just trying to think outside the box. And let's just get a conversation going. You know, and see if we can go a little better. Like I said, there's a reason why I live where I live. That's the police, the fire, the EMS, and our DPW. I like that I have water, I like that I have sewer, I like that, you know, my street gets plowed every time the plow comes down through, you know.
And I think if the numbers, the call numbers were going down, and we're even plateaued, I'd say hold white, but I don't see where they haven't plateaued, they just keep going up.
Almost 100 every year.
And so for me, Greg, I'm looking at this, that I don't want to kick the can down the road anymore. That if it means we have a full council discussion about this staffing number, then let's have it. Because then you need to know, and Jenny needs to know, how to really address the fire department and personnel. Okay. Is there an amount that you need to transfer? Did you say it before?
Well, it's going to depend on how far you want to project. I'm comfortable projecting all the way to the end of December. I'd rather look at it every couple of months to see what the activity is.
What are you projecting for the third quarter? Can we do it in quarters?
We could do it in quarters, yeah. But for example, right now we're 125,000 in the red, and so if we were to go, let's see. Okay, let me do some math for 1 second.
Well, it's $22,000 a pay cycle. There's 2 pay cycles per month. 6.
So right now, we would need a budget adjustment of about $283,000 to get us through the end of September.
Okay.
But that's just for salary. I'd have to add FICA and retirement on top of that. And so we could take, as I said, about 164 from the .1 and then the rest from fund balance. But I can do better math for the council presentation.
Okay. And it'll be for quarter 3.
Well, it'll fund it through quarter 3. So it'll cover the excess right now. That will leave the training budget intact. Because if you want to combine the two, there's about $72,000 remaining in the training budget.
I'd rather not.
Don't we need a training budget? Don't you still have people who need to be trained for things?
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't think the training budget's an option to dip into yet.
Okay, so you'll get us something, it'll probably be north of 200. John, did you have any?
My thought, and what you were all citing, was the risk of fatigue, overwork, et cetera, on the health and welfare and even life of people in these positions. And I think that that's something that needs to be kept in mind, because if we can save some money, but then have a terrible event occur, the death of a fireman, fire person, or some untoward thing that really was contributed to by fatigue, confusions, etc. And I do think these are dangerous jobs, and that and I'm happier dealing with a little roughage on the street cracks in the outside, the sidewalk, et cetera, than seeing in the paper that we lost someone. Possibly because, I mean, it's a dangerous job, double the size of it, and you can still have a terrible thing happen. But what I'm hearing you say is that you're observing that there's increased danger in some of these jobs caused by fatigue, overwork, that sort of thing. So if that's in fact the case, I think it has to be seen as a matter of well-being of an employee.
Well, I think you raise a good point, John, which is that that's potentially unmatched in many of our other departments, where it's a matter of,
Anything can happen. You can, someone can fall under the lawnmower in the park.
well, or the
So,
shredder.
Chief, now that COVID, hopefully we're on the downside of COVID, is there an opportunity where council members can actually come in and observe the operations so that maybe they can see firsthand?
Absolutely, I'd love them all in, yeah. I would personally give you a tour, I'll schedule the entire day.
Are you shaking your head now?
I just want to make a point, this is more for the viewers that might be listening, but I just want to make a point that, yes, we want our 911 calls, we want DPW, but I just want everybody to recognize that there are many other services that the city provides to the public. We have our general government support, we have our entire public safety, which includes police and fire, code enforcement, we have our transportation, we have our economic assistance, we have our culture and recreation departments, we have our home and community services, we have our water, we have our sewer, we have our OPT. You know, we have all of our capital projects that we do. So I just want them to understand that there are many, many services that the city provides our community, not just 3 or 4 major areas. And we all work together to be able to provide and support each department. That's why I think it's crucial that, as Greg said, we look at the entire 2023 budget as a whole to make the funding decisions. So I just wanted that for the public to understand that there's a lot of services that we provide.
There's one more item, so the 2022 July budget reconsiderations.
Yeah, you'll recall we did this the last year, 2 years here. And in this year's 2022 budget, we included a number of items that were listed as July reconsiderations. They weren't included in the budget, but they were to be reconsidered in July. The first thing that we'd like to reconsider are training budgets. I sent an email to the department heads asking, are there training budgets that need to be increased for the rest of this year? We've had a few years with minimal budgets now. I shared with you the results of that inquiry. There's a few departments that asked for some modifications. They're listed there. I would like to include the 2022 July budget reconsiderations at a discussion item at probably this coming council meeting. Not just for the training budgets, but we're also going to talk with department heads about the other items that were listed as July reconsiderations, and we'll come back and just have a discussion with the council about where those are and priorities list and how we want to treat them. If you want to decide to take some action, it might not be at this council meeting, it's the next one.
I've got 327,866 for reconsideration.
That's right.
So these are just suggestions, Greg, that's what you're suggesting?
Those are the additional budget requests, so that would be those amounts would need to be added for transfer.
We're coming out of these lines, though, I'm in my budget looking at the reconsiderations. Is that, you're pulling money out, like engineering training, further engineering, what am I misreading this?
So when you're looking at
I'm looking at the budget shared with, these are the reconsiderations. I'm looking at this budget.
possibly, so I asked the department specifically about training. I didn't ask them to look at that list.
Like I said, what other training needs do you have? Because we cut training budgets. I don't even know if they're included as reconsiderations, really. They were might have cut.
It says training.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have that. So yes, those are training budget increases that we have.
Is it really not one of these up to full time?
No, we're looking at a total of, it's like under $15,000 for request for training.
But I would say this would go to discussion with all the other considerations too.
Oh, gotcha.
So it would be separate motion, just for it all.
Yeah.
I think I'm okay saying yes. One of them's included, so.
You're fine, it's not personal. All right, we'll move topic I. Funds of full council. We'll give us a correct number before me.
Yep, I will send it to you, but
Then, is there a need for an executive session?
Well, it's always you. Why does everybody look at me?
Because it's always you.
No, sir, as a matter of fact.
So,
I was looking at the red side, sure, shake one of them.
I mean, we talked about this a couple times. We're gonna think about what would you like to see, how the city's doing.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Chair Carson would like to see a financial report of how the city is doing on a quarterly basis.
Yes,
So we'll see if we
yes.
can put something.
That is on my list to be completed soon. Normally, we do it by the end of July. I just have not completed it yet.
I totally understand that there's contractors from 21 that could be submitting invoices, I get that, but just a snapshot, that's all I'm asking for, just to kind of understand where we're at.
Yeah, You got the first quarterly report, I think I did it in May, and now I'll be working on the second quarterly. I want to try to wait until the next sales tax check comes in, which we usually get around the 20th of the month, because that will tell me how you did in the month of May.
If there's no other items that need to be brought up, a motion to adjourn.